Firing modes. We will use the term mode quite a bit in this manual. This refers either to the type of firing you are doing, cone fire mode for example, or to the current operating state of the controller. There are three basic operating states for the controller. Idle mode. This is where the display is flashing idle alternately with the current temperature of the kiln chamber. When in this mode, the kiln is waiting to be programmed. Ready mode. This is where the kiln is ready to be fired. There is a program loaded, and if you press start, the kiln will run the program. It will flash ready. The last is live mode. This refers to when the kiln is firing. When the kiln is firing, it will only display the current chamber temperature unless the program is in a hold. In this case, it will show the amount of hold time remaining alternately with the current chamber temperature. While in live mode, there are certain advanced features available that allow you to change the program on the fly. Consult the live mode section of your manual for instruction on using these advanced features. Using the keys. There are three keys on your controller. As you can see, they are labeled according to their function. The first button is used to start, stop, and select or enter. Use this button to start programming the kiln, start firing the kiln, stop firing the kiln, or to enter a selection you have toggled to using the up and down arrow keys. The up and down arrow keys are used mostly to toggle through menus and navigating to the correct temperature and time values, but they also have some single functions. The up arrow may be used while the kiln is firing or in live mode to see what segment of a program the kiln is currently firing, and the down arrow can be used to review a program while the kiln is in ready or idle mode to review the program currently programmed in the kiln. The controller has a special feature built in that allows you to scroll to the temperature and time values quicker. Individual presses will advance the display in single increments, minutes when adjusting time and degrees when adjusting temperature. If you hold down the arrow, it will slowly increase the speed at which it advances. When you release the key, it will revert back to the original speed so you can slowly approach the value you want. When entering time values, it is important to be aware of the fact that everything to the right of the decimal point is minutes, and everything to the left is hours. Menu description. There are four basic firing modes and one options menu to choose from in the main menu. To access the menu, simply press the Start key while the kiln display is flashing idle. This tells the controller you want to start programming. Use the arrow keys to toggle up or down through the menu until you find the selection you want, and then press Enter to select it. The five choices are Cone Fire, Glass, PMC, Ramp and Hold, and Options. Cone Fire Mode. Cone fire mode is the most popular way to fire ceramics. All clay and glazes have cone values associated with them. Cone fire mode allows you to fire your kiln to the correct value without having to know how to write a firing program. You will, however, need to give it some data to work with. First, you will select cone fire by pressing Start, then toggling to the correct menu with the arrow keys, and press Enter. The first question it is going to ask you is whether or not you want to preheat. It is very important to make sure your clay is completely dry before you fire it. Water still in the clay will want to escape as steam when it reaches 212 degrees Fahrenheit and could damage your piece. If you are not sure if it is completely dry, you can set a preheat time, which brings the kiln very slowly up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit and holds it there for as long as you tell it. It will then begin the program you have entered. A 2-hour preheat is usually adequate for most pieces of the size that could fit in your kiln. A good way to check if your piece is dry is to hold it up to your cheek. If it feels cool, it probably still has some moisture in it. It is important to note that you should not use preheat to dry out very wet pieces, since the moisture is not good for your elements or band. The next question it is going to ask you is, what cone do you want to fire to? Every clay body and glaze has a recommended cone value. Cone refers to pyrometric cones, which measure heat work in your kiln. If you are unsure of the cone value, consult an expert before you continue. Cone values with a leading 0 fire much cooler than cone values without them. For example, a cone 06 fires to approximately 1828 degrees, whereas a cone 6 fires to 2232. To select a cone value, use the up and down arrows to scroll to the cone value you want, then press enter. The next question it will ask you is what speed you would like to select. Depending on the cone value, a slow firing will take about 12 hours. Slow is recommended for all of your bisque firings. Medium speed will take approximately 7.5 hours. Medium is recommended for all your glaze firings. A fast firing will take around 4.5 hours and is only recommended for firing lusters and decals. To select a firing speed, use the arrow keys to toggle to the desired speed and press enter. The last question it will ask you is if you want to hold at a peak temperature. A 5-minute hold time is often recommended to allow the kiln to balance out and for glazes to flow. We rarely recommend holding for more than 20 minutes. To enter a 5-minute hold, use the arrow keys to select the time value and press enter. It is very important to remember that everything to the right of the decimal is minutes and everything to the left is hours. A 5-hour hold time could seriously damage your kiln. Once you have entered a hold time, the kiln will go into ready mode, meaning it is ready to start. Before you start, it is a good idea to press the down arrow and review the program you have entered. If it is correct, press the start key to start the firing. We recommend that you do not leave the kiln unattended for too long and always be there when it is scheduled to turn off. When the kiln is done firing, it will beep 14 times and the display will read complete, or CPLT, alternately with the current temperature of the kiln and the amount of time it took to run the program. It is a good idea to keep a log of each firing that lists the program and the firing time and how the wear turned out. When the firing times start to take longer and longer, it is a good indication that your elements will need replacing soon. Remember, just because the kiln says the firing is complete does not mean the kiln is cool. Watch the temperature and unload it when it is cool enough to unload, or around 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Glass fire mode. Like cone fire mode, glass fire mode allows you to fire your kiln without having to know how to write a firing program. Just give it some data and the controller will run the correct program for your fused, slumped, or tack fused piece. Glass programs differ from standard ceramic firing programs because they also control the cooling side to anneal the glass. Scott's preset glass programs are designed to work with the two most popular types of fusible glass, COE 90 and COE 96. Fusible glass is specifically designed to be compatible. Never use 90 with 96 and always use glass specifically designed for fusing. Use the Fuse program when you want to melt 2 or more layers of compatible glass completely together. Use the Tack program when you want to heat 2 or more layers of glass just to the point where they stick. And use the Slump program when you want to soften the glass to the point where it will slump into or over a mold. To enter a glass fire program, begin by pressing Start from idle mode, then toggling to Glass or GLAS with the arrow keys and press Enter. The first question it is going to ask you is what speed you want, slow, medium, or fast. Projects that are large in diameter or have multiple layers of glass need to fire slower than smaller, thinner projects. Use the chart in your manual to select the speed that is correct for your project. Then use the arrow keys to toggle to the speed you want and press Enter to select it. Next, it'll ask you to pick a process, slump, tack fuse, or full fuse. Use the arrow keys to toggle to your selection and press Enter. The kiln will go into ready mode, meaning it is ready to start. Before you start, it is a good idea to press the down arrow to review the program you have entered. If it is correct, press the Start key to start the firing. We recommend that you do not leave the kiln unattended for too long, and always be there when it is scheduled to turn off. When the kiln is done firing, it'll beep 14 times, and the display will read CPLT, or complete, alternately with the current temperature of the kiln and the amount of time it took to run the program. Remember, just because the kiln says the firing is complete does not mean the kiln is cool. Watch the temperature and wait to open the lid until it is cool enough to unload. With glass, it is usually best to wait until the kiln has cooled to room temperature. It is a good idea to keep a log of each firing that lists the program, the firing time, and how the project looked after it was fired. If you need to make adjustments to your program to fire hotter or cooler, You can place the kiln in modified glass fire mode, which we will talk about in the options portion of this video. It is also possible to make adjustments to the program while the kiln is firing. Consult the Live Mode section of your manual for instructions on using these advanced features. PMC, or precious metal clay, is a relatively new product invented by material scientists from Mitsubishi. It allows you to work with precious metals in a clay form, usually to make jewelry or other artistic items. The precious metal is ground up in specific particle sizes and then mixed with a clay binder. Once you have shaped the clay into a form you like, you fire it in a kiln and the binder burns out, leaving you with pure silver or gold. PMC comes in many different forms: silver, gold, copper, bronze. We chose to include built-in programs for the three most popular types: PMC Plus and PMC 3, which are silver, and PMC Gold. Each one has a fast and a slow version. The slower programs tend to produce a stronger, more pure end product, so we generally recommend the slow versions when you have the time. Select a PMC program by pressing Start from idle mode, then toggling to PMC with the arrow keys and press Enter. Next, you will toggle to the program that matches the type of PMC you are firing and the speed at which you want to fire using the up and down arrow keys. Then press Enter to select it. Each program will give you the opportunity to change the peak temperature and hold time. We recommend that you use the current factory set values by pressing the Enter key. If you need to change them, you can use the up and down arrow keys and change the values and then press Enter. After selecting your hold time, the kiln will go into Ready mode. Press the down arrow to review the program or just press Start to start the firing. We recommend that you do not leave the kiln unattended for too long and always be there when it is scheduled to turn off. When the kiln is done firing, it will beep 14 times and the display will read CPLT, or complete, alternately with the current temperature of the kiln and the amount of time it took to fire the program. Remember, just because the kiln says the firing is complete does not mean the kiln is cool. Watch the temperature and wait to open the lid until it is cool enough to unload safely. Some PMC products, like bronze and copper, require you to use a lidded container with copper in it to fire the clay successfully. We recommend using a ceramic container since metal containers can oxidize and turn your kiln black. Consult your PMC supplier for more details. Ramp and hold programming. Ramp and hold is a programming mode that allows you to write your own firing programs. It's used when you are firing something that requires programs different from the factory programs found in cone fire mode, glass fire mode, or PMC programming modes. Whenever possible, we still suggest you use the built-in firing modes. But if you need to do something different, like growing crystals in a ceramic glaze, casting thick pieces of glass, or maybe tempering a custom-made tool, you will need to use ramp and hold mode. Before we get started, it is a good idea to know a little bit more about firing programs. A firing program consists of a series of one or more segments that are strung together to form the program. A segment consists of a firing rate, expressed in degrees per hour, a temperature that you are trying to reach at that rate, and an amount of time you want to hold at that temperature. Entering a new ramp and hold program. Select ramp and hold mode by pressing Start from the idle mode, then scrolling to R-HD with the arrow keys and press Enter. The first question it will ask you is if you want to load an existing program. We will talk about this in a later segment. For now, use the arrow key to scroll to Pro and press Enter. Next, the controller will ask you where you want to store your program. You can store up to 5 programs. Be sure you keep a list of your stored programs so you know which spots you have open. Use the arrow key to scroll to the number where you want to store your program and press Enter. Next, the controller will ask you how many segments are in your program. You can write programs that contain up to 8 segments. Use the arrow key to scroll to the number of segments in your program and press Enter. The controller will then have you enter the values for each segment in your program, starting with the first rate, or RA1. Use the arrow keys to scroll to the degrees per hour in rate 1 and press enter. Next, you will be asked to input the temperature you want the kiln to go to in segment 1. It will display degrees F1 if your kiln is set to program in Fahrenheit, or degrees C1 if your kiln is set to program in Celsius. Use the arrow keys to scroll to the correct temperature and press enter. The last piece of data for the segment it needs is how long you want to hold at that temperature. Use the arrow keys to scroll to the correct time and press enter. Remember, everything to the right of the decimal is minutes, and everything to the left of the decimal is hours. If you have more than one segment in your program, the controller will then ask you to input the values for the remaining segments. After the data for the final segments have been entered, the controller will go to ready mode, which means if you press start, the kiln will start firing. We recommend before pressing start to press the down arrow to review your program. When you have verified it is correct, press start to run your program. Loading an existing ramp hold program. Oftentimes you will want to run a program that you have already written and stored. To load an existing program, select ramp hold mode by pressing start from the idle mode. Then scroll to R-HD with the arrow keys and press enter. Next it will ask you to enter the value of the program you want to run. Use the arrow keys to scroll to the correct program and press enter. The program is now loaded and ready to run. Press the down arrow to review your program and make sure it is correct. Once you have verified that this program is correct, press enter to start the program.